Thank you, Carol, for joining us today for this Zoom conference about being one of the first female pilots in the Air Force. What inspired you to join the Air Force?
Well, I was always flying in airplanes when I was a little kid, but I went to the University of Oregon here and I saw an ad in the school paper that said, learn to fly with ROTC. And I thought, boy, you know, I didn't want to be a nurse or secretary or anything, but I just thought, well, now that would be the best job in the whole world. And I called them up and I said, that's what I want to do. And they said, you can't, you're a girl. And I said, well, I'm not interested in, but they sent me some information. And one of the things they had was meteorology. And I thought, well, now that sounds interesting. Plus, it's close enough to aviation. It might help because someday they'll open pilot training, I think, and I'll maybe try that. So that's what I did. I signed up for the meteorology program that finished at the University of Oregon, graduated, got my commission, and then went to, they sent me to Texas A&M in the AFIT program to study meteorology. So while I was there, they had an aero club and I joined the aero club and I got my private license, and about halfway through the program there, it was a one-year program, about halfway through that, they had something again in the newspaper. General Westmoreland was retiring and he said they were going to open pilot training, Air Force pilot training to women. And I was like, well, there's my inroad. I need to do that. Went down to Bergstrom Air Force Base and get into the program. They let me know just before we graduated that I got selected for that first program. And it really didn't matter to me to be in the first class or not, but to me, it was just like, wow, I'm going to get to be a pilot. That's great.
What did your family think about you choosing to join the Air Force and specifically aviation?
I think my folks always said you can do whatever you want to do, be whoever you want to be. And, but my dad had been in World War II as a Coast Guard officer. And I think when I told them, I kind of made my decision without talking to them too much. But when I told them that's what I wanted to do, my dad was kind of like, well, I would have thought you'd join the Navy. You know, he was from a time where things were different, I think. But they didn't have Navy ROTC at the University of Oregon. They had, I think they had Army, but they had the Air Force, so that's what they had. My mom thought, you know, okay, it was, you know, mid-70s. It was a tough time to go out there and get a job doing anything. And so I think they were happy that I sort of settled on something that I thought was interesting that I wanted to do. And they supported me. My little sister, we have 5 kids in the family, but she said, Carol, if you think you're going to be a pilot, that's a pipe dream. And so I always remember that.
What did she say when you became a pilot?
Yeah, she was kind of surprised, I think. You know, I think all the kids were. My youngest brother, who was born on my birthday, 5 years younger, he thought that was pretty cool. And he ended up joining Air Force ROTC and going on and becoming a pilot himself. So he did pretty much the same thing I did. You know, I'd been in for a couple of years and flying around the world, and he thought, wow, that looks like a pretty interesting job. So, so he followed me into it. We ended up, both of us, working for American Airlines because American merged with US Air, who he was working for. So we're in the same uniform throughout our lives, kind of. That's pretty cool.
What did it mean to you to be part of the first undergraduate pilot training class to include women?
Well, I thought, you know, it was a real responsibility to do a good job. Of course, I would have tried to do a good job at any rate, but you know, to be in the first, I think we were looked at a little closer, and I kind of expected they'd be looking at us to try to figure out what you need to do to train women versus training men. Are there differences? Are there accommodations or whatever? I think more they tried to get us to fit into the men's program and do it the way they did it, you know. And I don't know that that was right or not. I mean, all of us got through, and you know, it was difficult at times, but for me anyway, I was just very excited to have the chance, and I was amazed at what they let you do. I didn't really know anything about it when I started, so you know, it was all new experiences, very fun.
How did you learn about the opportunity?
The opportunity to be a pilot?
Yes.
Well, as I said, when I was at Texas A&M, I read in the paper that what General Westmoreland was going to retire, and he said pretty soon we're going to have women in the Air Force as pilots, and so that's the first I'd heard about it. When I contacted my captain about it, he went to the message center to get a copy of the message from the message center that said they were going to allow him in, and with that we were able to get an application and a physical, and that's how I learned. I finished the Air Force meteorology program and went right to Hondo.
When museum visitors see your exhibit, what do you hope they will learn from your experience?
I guess I'm kind of curious to see the exhibit myself. It's kind of exciting to see what it is, but I think they'll learn that women have been pilots, that we are pilots, and that they would have that opportunity too. I think when I was young, that wasn't, it just wasn't something I thought was possible until I saw an ad for it in the university paper. But it was not something I was really aware of. I'd seen the Blue Angels when I was a little kid, but I just figured all pilots were men. But I did later, after I became an Air Force pilot, I met some of the WASPs from World War II. And, had I known a little more about that, it might have given me a little more interest in maybe I can do this. But of course, after war, we were told to just go home. We don't need you anymore. So, but it's nice to see things are changing still.
How do you feel about having your story featured at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force?
Well, I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud to be a little piece of history. That's pretty neat. And I think all the gals did a good job and had interesting careers. So I think that's a really great thing, and it's really good that they put that out there. I know that picture of the 10 of us has been in the Pentagon. I think it was hanging in the museum at Wright-Patterson, and other places. So over the years, I've run into other pilots who have been to the museum and said, hey, I saw a picture of you here or there, and they get a big kick out of that. Down on the Riverwalk in, I think it's Tampa, Florida, a friend was walking with his family along there, and they actually have a big exhibit with the 10 of us pictured there, an airplane in the background. It's sort of, it's etching on glass kind of thing, and it's right along the Riverwalk outdoors, and they're all life-size, we're all life-size there. Anyway, they're walking along. He goes, hey, that's Carol. I know that gal. And he sent me a picture of it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Nobody knew that was up there, that they did that. But so yeah, I think I've seen that over the years, that it really is kind of neat to have that. And I think it inspires young women, maybe, and maybe young men to, hey, that's something I could do for life. That would be pretty cool. So yeah, I'm very glad you're doing this exhibit, and I think I hope people learn something from it.
Before undergraduate pilot training opened to women, had you thought about becoming a pilot?
Well, yes. When I went to the U of O, I wanted to be a pilot. I actually, my sophomore year there, I took a skydiving course. It was a PE course, and sometimes the pilot would let me fly the airplane up to altitude and talk about it and stuff. And so I thought, this would be pretty fun to be a pilot. But as a little kid, we used to ride our bikes out to the nearby little airport and watch the pilots and watch the airplanes take off and land. And so it was something, yes, I probably wanted to do it since I was a little kid. I think my first flight was when I was 3 years old. A neighbor had a son who had been a pilot in World War II. And he had a little airplane, and he took us up in the little airplane. We flew from Eugene, Oregon to the coast. And I can still remember seeing the sand dunes coming up and the ocean, and that was just so exciting. And my dad, who was sitting in the left seat, as I remember, let me sit on his lap and see that. And I was just like, wow. And I was just 3, so that was one of my earliest memories. So yeah, I thought about it. It just, maybe I didn't really think that's something I can do.
You are an inspiration to many women who joined the Air Force and became pilots. What women inspired you to break barriers and be part of the first class of undergraduate pilot training to include women?
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't really, well, let me think about this. I went through a phase maybe in high school where I read a lot of books, and some of them were about the World War II fighter aces. And, you know, I was fascinated by that. I read a lot of that, a lot of the military history stuff. So, so that probably inspired me, but I don't remember women being much a part of that. I guess, you know, I was aware of Amelia Earhart and maybe some of the women of that era as pilots, but not really, you know, it was like most of them were kind of just showpieces out there. They weren't really doing it, and they didn't make a living doing it. And so I think it was inspiring, though, that they were able to get out there and do that. So I don't know about particular women that inspired me, but I think the more exposure women get in general now, the better, because there wasn't a whole lot back in the 70s. I don't think there were, you know, they just didn't publish a lot of that. There were women in politics you'd hear about, a few, and there were women, you know, of course you had your suffragettes back in the, was it the 20s, you know, when they were fighting for the right to vote, even as late as that. So yes, I think over the years, at least the impression I got was that things were moving, but not real fast. So you had to work at it. You had to learn how to fit in and learn how to do this stuff. So that was inspiring. I guess my biggest inspiration might have been my mom, because she was a librarian, raised in Kansas during the Dust Bowl, and she found a way to go on to college and get a master's degree in librarianship and history, and then take off for Oregon from Kansas, and she was a reference librarian at the university there, and she always kind of said, you have to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. You know, it's fine if you want to get married, raise a family and everything, but learn how to fend for yourself first. And so that was a big inspiration too.
Definitely good advice. Sadly, Susan Rogers passed away in 1992. How would you describe her?
And Susan was in the other section. You know, in pilot training, we have two sections. One flies one schedule and the other flies the other. So they just the airplanes all the time. Was in section, know her very well. We knew the section very well, but the other section, we'd have meetings once in a while, but didn't know her real well. I did run into her at Scott Air Force Base later when I was working at headquarters MAC, and I talked to her a little bit. I think she was very sweet, intelligent, very pretty, very nice person. That was the impression that I got, and I didn't hear that she died until many years after she did, and that's pretty sad. But she had a lot of potential, so I'm glad she's included in all of this too. That's great.
How long did you serve in the Air Force, and what rank were you when you separated?
I served just about 12 years. I went in, I got my commission in 1975, and I got out in 1987. I was a major. I had pinned on major about 6 months prior, and I thought I'd make a career of it, but they said I was going to go to the Pentagon and never see another airplane again. So I said, no, I think I want to keep flying. And so I put my papers in. They had one of these kind of early out things where you could put in your papers with 6 months time in grade, you could get out. So you didn't have the longer obligation for taking the promotion. We have some of the benefits from that, luckily. But I kind of wish I'd stayed in the reserves, but so much happened when we got married and had a child, and it's really hard to make the commitment for the reserves with something like that.
What were some of your most memorable assignments or missions? Are there any significant events from your career you would like to share?
Well, for 5 years, I flew weather reconnaissance, and that was neat for me because I had the weather background. And we flew my first 2 years after pilot training. We're out of Guam flying the WC-130s into typhoons, and that was awesome for me. I loved being stationed on Guam and flying all over the Pacific. And flying into typhoons was very it was just scientifically for me, it was very interesting, and learning how to deal with a big crew. And I became a aircraft commander there after a little less than 2 years, and we flew a lot and got to see a lot of places in the world that I'd never imagined that I would see. We went to Japan and the Philippines, Okinawa, Kwajalein, and of course that area is so ripe with history, especially military history, that I'm just really glad I got to see all of that. But you know, flying into hurricanes and typhoons, there were probably some very memorable times in that, but you can just imagine, you know, I mean, sometimes it was a little scary, but mostly it was fascinating, and it was great, you know, because you work as a team and you get the job done. And I went to Kiesler, and that's when I met my husband, and that was in 1980. And again, 3 years of flying hurricanes there. And we also did missions to Europe and North Africa, a lot of support missions for other things like fighter deployments and whatnot. So it was good, interesting flying. I don't have any war stories, but if you give me a beer and we sat and talked for a while, I could probably think of some. But that was neat. And then after that, I went over to Ramstein, where you're going here pretty soon, and I flew the T-39s and C-21s. That's the T-39 it's an older business jet called a Saberliner, and then the C-21 was it's a Lear 35. But we got the T-39s and flew those all over Europe, and it didn't even have an autopilot. So that was very challenging flying and very good flying. And then when we got the C-21, it had all the latest equipment. So we actually went back to Tucson, Arizona to check out in the C-21 with flight safety there. And we were in the initial cadre in the Air Force to fly those. And then we got to fly our airplanes back over to Europe, which was exciting. We kind of had to hop through, I think, Goose Bay and Keflavik and Glasgow. So that was a neat trip and a neat experience to take an airplane we just trained on and fly them halfway around the world. Most of our job over there, we flew VIPs around Europe, and a lot of the generals and whatnot that had to go places. And the generals would actually get to fly the airplane, and we were all checked out as instructor pilots. So we had to kind of help them and watch them and make sure the airplane was safe, and we stayed safe, because they usually didn't get to fly very much. So that was challenging sometimes. But I thought the flying in Europe was really interesting. I like that. And met a few VIPs. We flew Ted Kennedy around Italy once, and you know, just little bits of history that you get to touch. It was during the Reagan years, which you know, you had that shuttle diplomacy going on. So a lot of things were happening politically in the world, and we all had a little piece of that, knowing, oh, that's why that person was going there or something. So very interesting flying. And after that, I went to headquarters MAC there at Scott Air Force Base. And you know, I worked a staff job, and that was okay, but I can do that for a few years. But I had to know that I could get back to flying. And so the Pentagon wasn't going to hack it for 8 years. So that's why I got out.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it took so long for the Air Force to start training female pilots, since the WASP had proven women's ability during World War II?
Well, I think at the end of the war, they really didn't need them, and there was a surplus of pilots, of course, you know, and a lot of men didn't have jobs either, and the civilian world didn't need them because there were a lot of men looking for jobs in the civilian world. So I think they didn't need women, and they had plenty of men applying for those jobs. It was very popular, I think, for many years. And the same thing kind of happened when Vietnam wound down. I'm not sure that they had a real problem getting people to be pilots during the Vietnam era, because for a lot of guys, that was a way to keep from being a grunt on the ground, you know, and so I think that was popular and still very competitive. And after Vietnam, it probably wasn't a real big time to be looking at having women, but I think the Navy actually started with women in the pilot training. And why they did it, I don't know, because again, there was a surplus of pilots in the military. In fact, my ROTC class, the guys that were signed up to be pilots were told, hey, we don't need you anymore. You can go pick a rated sup or get out. So I think that, I think the reason they did it was the mid-70s, and a few congresswomen were kind of pushing it, saying, why don't women have the same rights? And also a lot of the military women that were in the military, at least for the Air Force, if you were going to advance in rank, being a pilot was the only person to be. If you didn't have those wings, you weren't going to last very long or do very much in the Air Force. So I think that was probably, you know, the women in Congress were finally saying, hey, if women are going to serve in the military, they should have the same opportunities to advance. And being a pilot is where it's at. So I think there was probably a little push there from Congress, maybe from some activist women, but you know, what was the question?
I asked if why you think it took so long for the Air Force to add women pilots when the WASP had proven themselves.
Wow, that was a long answer for that. Well, anyway, that's why I thought, you know, they needed the right people to push in the right areas, and they really, I don't think they did it because they needed women or that they needed to select from a bigger pool. I think it was just, hey, if women are going to be in the Air Force, they need to advance, and in order to do that, they need to be pilots. Maybe that was it. I'm not really sure, but it was a long time, and it was interesting getting to know a few of the WASP later and hearing their stories. And of course, they were upset that they were just basically kicked out after the war and that they didn't get the benefits or anything. They eventually did, but most of them were too old to enjoy them by that point.
Right. Did you think pilot training was more difficult because of your gender?
Not necessarily because of my gender. I think maybe because of the men's gender, because they were used to having a certain way to treat women, you know, and so I think they had more to accommodate. You know, we'd never been to pilot training, just like the guys had never been to pilot training. So, I mean, we had to learn the same things and learn how to do that, all that stuff, and the academics and all that. And I think women had every ability that men had to do that, you know, maybe some cases even better, you know, and the women did very well academically, and flying wise, I think they didn't really have any innate flying problems. I think where the problem came in was probably the men accepting us, the instructors accepting us. And, you know, the other problem was just being in the fishbowl of being in the first class. But, you know, some of the instructors were very nice to us, very nice people. Some of them were absolutely, they didn't think women ought to be there, and they didn't mind telling you that. So I would say it was their gender problem more than ours, because for us, we were pretty much on an equal footing. We all had a lot to learn. And I guess for the men that couldn't accept us and didn't bother to want to teach us very well, maybe that made it a little harder for us, but I think it was more their problem. I mean, we all did okay anyway.
Did you feel the instructors were harder on the female UPT students?
Um, like I said, some maybe, you know, there was one instructor I had, I remember, and I remember he just didn't talk to me about stuff, but we had two other male students at the table, and he would be telling them all about how to do this and that and talking to them. And one time I asked him, why aren't you teaching me this stuff? Why aren't you talking to me? And he's like, well, you're never going to fly a fighter pilot. You don't need to know that stuff. And so that was kind of an insult, but it was like, that's the way he's thinking about it. And he's never going to come around. I know even when we were flying sometimes on the radio, he'd make fun of the other women, their voices on the radio, or, you know, it was, he really had an attitude. And I think, you know, that was his problem, that he really couldn't accept it. But I don't know that it made it harder for me. I was just like, okay, you know, maybe I can fly with somebody else when I get the chance. And I had to maybe work a little harder to learn stuff, you know, by reading and talking to other people. But you know, it's just another obstacle. You learn to get around it.
Did you ever feel standards or requirements were modified to help the women pass pilot training?
Oh, let me think here. You know, I guess you've heard the story about the weighted ejection seat. Have you already heard that story a few times? I won't bother retelling it.
Go ahead.
Well, somebody at some point during the T-38, we transitioned from the T-37 to the T-38. And while the T-37 had an ejection seat, it didn't come up during that part. But in the T-38, somebody said, well, you know, this ejection seat is a certain weight, and the women are lighter than the men are. And so we need to put lead weight in the seat of the ejection seat and make the women carry that out there and set it in there. It's actually, it was a pack that you'd sit on that was a survival kit for when they flew over water or something, you know, for other models, not the training models, but the package was there. And so I guess they took that at face value, and they put a 40-pound lead weight in this seat pack. And you'd have to carry that out along with your heavy parachute and your kit bag. And, you know, you carry that out in the middle of summer in Arizona. You'd carry that out to the airplane and haul it up the ladder and set that in the seat in the T-38. And then it had buckles that you'd have to, like seatbelt buckles, you'd have to buckle that into your parachute. And so if you ejected, that lead weight would go with you. And supposedly that would, you know, arrange the weight so that the seat didn't tumble, or I'm not sure what they thought it was going to do. Anyway, then somebody complained about the lead weight, and they actually put the survival kit in there instead. And that was heavy too. And then we had to go to extra training to learn how to do all the stuff in the survival kit. So that was kind of a pain. And then the story that I hear is it's at some point along the way, they had an IG inspection of the base, or the IG came down and asked Connie, well, is there anything that you got questions about, or is there anything we can do for you? And she said, well, yeah, would you look into this question about whether the ejection seat would tumble if we didn't have weights in there? She said, some of the women are as heavy as some of the men. Some of the men were pretty light, and they don't have to carry this ejection thing, you know. And anyway, they looked into it and said, there is no basis for that. And it stopped right then and there. But that was near the end of the program. And so I think, you know, that whole thing was just somebody's, I don't know if it was designed as harassment or if they really thought that was a safety feature, but there was no data to support that. And so it wasn't an accommodation for us. It was kind of an accommodation that was really a handicap for us, if anything. The flight suits, I think we just had the men's flight suits, and you know, they didn't fit great, you know, but we weren't there to be in a beauty contest. We were there to learn to fly. The helmets and all that stuff was pretty heavy, and women generally don't have those kind of neck muscles and what. So I think at first, you know, your neck gets sore and you had to kind of get used to wearing it. I know we'd do our practice stuff in the room, my roommate and I, and we would wear our helmets while we were there just to work on those neck muscles, you know. And you were always in the airplane, of course, you always had to be looking around, clearing for other planes and stuff. And these helmets, you know, probably not the high-tech lightweight ones they've got today, but you know, I still have my old helmet from pilot training, and it's pretty heavy. We were wearing the same helmets and carrying the same parachutes and the gear as the men were. And for a while, in addition, we had the 40-pound seat packs. We did sports with them. I think there was something on that said that we did water polo in the summertime, Arizona. And of course, none of us had ever played that kind of sport before, I don't think. It was, you know, in there with the guys, you'd get kicked and pushed and dunked and everything. And so I think they kind of said, well, maybe that's not too good. Somebody's going to get hurt or drowned or something. So as I remember, they kind of split us off and we did something else. But a lot of the other phys ed kind of things that we did, and that was a big deal in pilot training, the running and the push-ups and the all that other stuff. We did the same things they did pretty much. I don't know that we met the Air Force standards as far as running a mile in a minute. Well, not in a minute, but you know, in 5 minutes or whatever they had to do. It wasn't in 5 minutes. It must have been like 8-minute mile or something. I don't remember. But we did the same PE classes for the most part. But I can't think of other accommodations. They had to take all the girly pictures down from the walls, so I guess they accommodated us that way.
Did they add any special classes for you ladies?
We all had to go through Hondo together before pilot training, even though for the guys, if they had a private license, they didn't have to go through Hondo before pilot training. But several of the women I had just got my private license, and several of them even had commercial licenses, but we all had to start out on the same footing there at Hondo. That's where you fly a little Cessna, learn how to fly a Cessna, basically. I think they give us like 30 hours, 40 hours in that, something like that. Maybe not even that much. I think that was more of a weeding out program, and I think that was one of the reasons they sent us to that, was to see if we were able to, you know, learn to do it the Air Force way. And so that might have been special that we all had to go through that, where the guys wouldn't have had to. All the guys that we went to pilot training with were right out of the Air Force Academy. And so they did that at the Air Force Academy. Other accommodations, I don't think of any. They did, you know, there was, the press was always interested in talking to us or taking pictures or whatnot. And I think from the start, they were pretty good about saying, no, we're not going to allow that, because these people they have to learn, they have class schedules. We're not going to be having interviews and stuff. But they did have these like PR days where they brought the press in and took pictures of us and interviewed us and stuff. And none of us liked that, because that was like right in the middle. Maybe the next day you had you know, a check ride or something, and it was kind of disruptive to have that distraction. I don't think any of us were real keen on the publicity side of it. We didn't want that intrusion. We wanted to just be left alone and do our job and learn something.
Do you think the acceptance of female aviators during the 1970s was symbolic of changes in America?
Oh yes, yes. I think things were happening. You know, it was they were going through some changes, and I think there was a little political pressure on the Air Force to do that. I think they had our class, and then 6 months later they started another class with 10 gals. Some of them didn't make it through, and I'm not sure the specifics there. But then I think they waited another year or more before they had another class with women pilots. And even then it was just a trickle. It was several years later, they still had just a trickle of women coming in. So this wasn't a full-fledged effort to say, well, we've got X number of men pilots, we're aiming for 20% women or something. No, it was just, okay, you know, if they're pushing us to have women pilots, we'll do that. Maybe they didn't have as many applicants, I don't know, but I would think that there were a lot of young women out there. I got phone calls from some of them that wanted to be pilots and said, what do I need to do? How did you do it? You know, and so, so yeah, I think there were political pressures on them to do it, but I think there was a lot of resistance in the higher ranks in the Air Force to having us do that. And even in the specific aircraft, you know, they didn't let us fly combat aircraft, and maybe you're coming up on another question about that, but they didn't let us fly combat, but they were the ones that decided what was combat and what wasn't. So my airplane, my weapons system was the 130s, and the only thing I could fly in 130s was weather reconnaissance. I could have, after the 5 years in weather reconnaissance, I could have gone to Little Rock as an instructor, but I would not have been able to instruct combat tactics, you know, like the short takeoff and landings, for example, or the airdrop stuff. So there was an awful lot of the program that I wouldn't be able to instruct in. So I would have been just a real basic 130 instructor. Certainly not a career advancement move. And they didn't let us become squadron commanders, at least in the 130s, because that was considered a combat role in any squadron, even the weather recon. So when I got out, they said, you can't be in the weather recon reserves. You have to, you know, they were flying the 130s and the Hurricane Hunters in the reserves, but they said, no, because you've got a combat restriction there. You can't come and do that because we have part of the reserve unit supports this combat mission. I don't know who makes those decisions, but so we, you know, I couldn't do that even in the reserves. So, so yeah, I think there were still restrictions for a long time.
What aircraft did you fly during your career?
In the Air Force, I flew the 130s, the WC 130s, Hercules, for 5 years, and then I flew the Saberliner T-39 for a year out at Ramstein, and then the Lear 35 at Ramstein. And then I continued to fly the Lear 35 when I went to headquarters MAC for a couple of years, but just to stay current in it. Then when I got out, I went into the airlines and I flew the 727s, Super 80s. That's a upgraded version of the DC-9. I flew 767s, 757s, flew the DC-10 for a little while, and then I flew the Boeing 777 the last 20 years of my airline career. Flew it international, big airplane, flew it international. I flew just over 30 years for the airlines.
Wow. If women had not been limited to flight instructors and transport and tanker pilots, what aircraft would you have chosen?
Oh, that's an interesting one. You know, I had a great interest in flying the A-10. It was a close air support aircraft with a great big gun. I had a friend that he had an assignment to that. They had him down at Tucson. We went down there and he kind of gave me the tour of it, let me sit in the seat and explained about their titanium bathtub that they sat in for bulletproofing. And, you know, I just thought now, and it was very responsive aircraft. I didn't get to fly in it, but, you know, you could see it. It was very responsive, a low level air support, you know, and I thought now, flying one of these super jet fighters and being in that kind of a squadron, that didn't appeal to me that much, but flying an A-10 probably would have been a lot of fun if I'd have been able to fly combat. Mm-hmm. That really appealed to me, but the 130 was the second choice, so that was pretty good too.
Right. Did you ever regret not being able to fly combat aircraft?
Not particularly, no. I think, you know, I didn't have a choice, so I can't regret something I didn't have a choice for. Yeah, I think my career went pretty well. I was really happy to do the things I did. I know when my brother graduated from pilot training, he called and said, well, what do you think? Should I put in for a fighter or a heavy? And I'm like, well, it depends on what you want to do in life, because there's a different mindset to each one. And these are the people you'll be associating with for many years. And you know, it's the competitiveness and all of that. So your combat squadron, I think being a female in a combat squadron, more power to the gals that did that, because that would be very competitive, very challenging, and you have to be on your A game all the time. And I think, you know, that's the top of the line. So I think that was very admirable that they got through that. No, I don't really regret that I didn't get to do that, because what I got to do was great. And so I told my brother about that, and he went and flew T-33s for a little while out of Tyndall, and then went to the 141. At that time, if you'd put in for a transport aircraft, but you were fighter qualified, then you were probably going to go to SAC, you know, and fly 135s or B-52s. And most of the guys didn't really want to do that. So he put in for the T-33, which was kind of like a little fighter. And then he got to go into MAC later, and flew 141s all over the world, and enjoyed that very much too. So yes, it's all these airplanes are obsolete now, aren't they? They're all in the boneyard somewhere.
Or here at the museum.
Yeah, there you go.
Was your status as one of the first Air Force female pilots well known throughout your career? Do you think it impacted your career or experience with the Air Force?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think, you know, I went to Guam first, and that I was, you know, it's a small MAC squadron on a SAC base. So, you know, it was sort of a little MAC, right? And so I went there first, and of course that was a big deal for the squadron. Oh, we're going to get one of the women pilots. They were actually very supportive, very welcoming. They wanted to do a lot of the publicity. The Stars and Stripes newspaper wanted to do stories and all of that. And I said, look, I just want to fit in. I want to do my job here. I don't want the added attention, and I don't want any special considerations or anything. So I went head to head with the ops officer a few times on that, because they wanted the publicity. They wanted to make a big deal about it and say, hey, we've got women out here that are flying this. So they did a little bit of that. But I think once you get into a squadron and people get to know you, it doesn't seem so much like you're somebody that different. You know, you're just another pilot. You've been through the pilot training, you're qualified to be there. And I don't think that you know, was a big deal after we all got to know each other. I flew with some of those guys many years. Some of them went on to Kiesler, and I saw them there. And then eventually, like 3 or 4 of the guys I flew with on Guam were flying for the airlines while I was there. And we actually flew together in the airlines too. So it's kind of fun to be a pilot. You have a certain connection with other pilots, and you look at each other as other pilots, not male, female, whatever. You're in a special club, kind of. So I think for the other squadrons, and of course I was the only gal out there as a pilot at Guam. We had one, well, kind of like a loadmaster, a weather observer in the back that was female. So not too many females out there. So that was something they made a bigger deal about. When I got to Kiesler, I think we had a female navigator. Never had another female pilot while I was there. And the same when I was at Ramstein, never had another female pilot. So I guess I don't really know what it was like to be in a group that had other females there. I always was the one representative of my sex, you know, and so it was a little extra effort to do a good job and be good with people, because, you know, they're going to judge all the gals that come beyond you as, you know, from the way they feel about you. So it's a responsibility.
Did becoming one of the first Air Force female pilots open other opportunities in your career?
Like in the Air Force, do you mean?
I mean, either way, if you saw it in the Air Force or after you separated.
In the Air Force, no, I don't think it did, because, you know, I would call, well, I'd call MPC, the Personnel Center, and say, hey, I'd like to do this or that. And they're like, tough luck. no job, you know. It's like, I don't think that that gave us a leg up. I never saw it anyway that it did. Even when I was at headquarters MAC, I didn't bring it up, you know, and then people might have asked if they kind of put the dates together and said, oh, you must have been in the first class. But so what, you know, I was just there. It didn't really, we all go through the same training. It doesn't really make it different to be a first or not. And also with the airlines, you know, I don't think I made a deal about that in my resume. I, you know, give them the dates and what I did, but I don't really remember that coming up in the interview. Later on, I think, you know, when people that I flew with would find that out for whatever reason, some of them were like, wow, that's pretty cool, you know, a little bit of history. What was it like? And for other guys that had been in the Air Force, you know, they were aware of that time frame. You know, a lot of them were all the same age. So I think it was interesting for them, but it didn't do anything for my career. The nice thing about the airlines is you get your seniority number and then you pick what you want to fly and where you want to go based on your seniority. So I wasn't trying to be a check airman or you know, work in the head office or anything like that. It wasn't really inspired to do that. So I don't think it really did much for me for the rest of my career. But other than on a personal note, you know, just having a little bit of history, that's pretty cool.
How do you think your success impacted other women?
I think in a positive way. You know, I've heard other women say it was an inspiration, and you know, I mean, they probably followed our progress through pilot training a little more. You know, if they were, especially if they were already in the Air Force. So, you know, I think that they could probably answer that better than I can. But I did get a call from another gal that had been a weather officer, and she was trying to get into pilot training, Stephanie Wells, and she eventually did get to pilot training a couple of years later, and went on to have a great Air Force career. I think she retired from it, and then has done a lot of other things in aviation. She's an inspiration to me, you know, looking at what she's done in her life. But you know, I'm really glad she was able to do that. And I encouraged her. I said, you know, eventually you'll get there if you just keep trying. You know, she had all the background for it. So, and now I think, you know, you've got another generation coming along, and they're fighter pilots and they're doing all this other stuff. So, I mean, I think that's pretty awesome. So maybe just the fact that we were successful probably helped open doors a little bit. But as I said before, it took a while before they really let women in any numbers. I don't know what the percentages are now. Maybe you can tell me, but it's not like it's 50-50 or anything.
No, I think it's still a very small percentage of women that are pilots. I want to say it's less than 12%. It might be closer to 6%.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's like the airlines. You know, it was like the airlines were about 3 to 5% all the time. You know, 3 to 5% of the major airlines were females while I was there. So yeah, very small percent. And I'm not sure why. You know, maybe they don't have a lot of women that pursue that career. And maybe it's not for everybody, because you spend a lot of time away from home, whether it's Air Force or the airlines. Maybe a little tougher to have a family. You know, I don't know, but I was happy to be able to do it.
Since you were involved in breaking the barrier for female Air Force pilots, did you break any other barriers during your career?
You know, I've seen some of the other gals say, well, they were the first aircraft commander on this airplane or another. And you know, I was probably the first female pilot flying into hurricanes and typhoons because I was the only one there. I was, you know, I was pretty early on to upgrade, less than 2 years after pilot training, to become an aircraft commander. I guess I didn't look at them as barriers. I just was trying to progress as best I could. flying in Europe in the Special Airlift Squadron, I was definitely an oddity over there. I think they had females in Special Airlift in the States. Maybe not when I got over there. It would have been 5 years after pilot training. I don't know if they had any in that, but you know, flying VIPs around, a lot of times they'd be a little shocked to see a female up there. They'd do a double take, you know, and I don't know, you know, I guess that's kind of a barrier, but not, I don't really look at those things as barriers, just being first because, well, you were the only one there. So I didn't, I wasn't the first to get out. Let's see, trying to think. Went to Air Command and Staff and did all the military training, but I don't think I really broke any barriers. You know, I think for these gals that went on to become general officers, working at the Pentagon, those kind of things, I'm amazed at what they're able to do. I read their stories and I think, wow, you go girl, you know, that's super that they are able to do those things. But I mean, I think going to pilot training was an accomplishment for me. As far as breaking a barrier, I think the Air Force did that by accepting us there. So I don't know that I did anything special that the guys didn't do as far as breaking a barrier.
What message would you give to young women considering a career in the Air Force?
Think about the Navy. Just kidding, because that's what my dad said. No, I would say, you know, if you're thinking you want to go that way, of course, study hard in school, do well in school, you know, pay a lot of attention to the STEM, math, and science classes. Stay away from drugs, alcohol, you know, keep your record clean. It's, you know, don't get any tattoos. That's what I tell my daughter. But anyway, yeah, it's, I think the Air Force was a great career. Lots of opportunity, lots of variety, a chance to see the world a little bit. My daughter's a whole different type, and she, you know, well, my husband and I being in the military, we kind of thought that might be something she'd be interested in. No way. She's definitely got her own mind, and you know, so I think that for gals that want to do that, especially the ones that want to be pilots, that they'll find a way to do it. They probably don't need my advice to do it. But, you know, if you're young, if you're in high school and you're thinking, hey, maybe that would be a career, you know, be advised it's not an easy career. And, you know, but you can do it if you want to do it. It doesn't take, you know, a genius in math or a certain bravery or anything. They teach you what you need to know to do a safe job. And I think being a pilot, we always used to say it's all about risk management, you know. You follow the rules, you stay on the safe side. And it's not, if you've watched the old movies where you've got the barnstormers, you know, crazy pilots and stuff, it's not like that at all. It's a very serious profession. So, you know, if you think you're just going to go out there and slip the surleys in the white clouds, it's not. It's a lot of work, but it is very rewarding. If you like to be outdoors and see the outdoors, if you want to travel, if you enjoy the one-on-one with somebody else that you talk to in the cockpit, those things are real. That's something that you really get to do a lot of as a pilot, you know, but, you know, it's maybe not for everybody, but if you think you want to do it, find out more about it. And I think it's a great career.